Have you ever walked into a grocery store and realized that the person smiling at you was actually carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders? A single mother scolded in front of customers. A hidden CEO who walked in just to observe, but froze when he met her eyes. This isn't just a story about justice. It's a story about what happens when someone finally sees you. Bristol Creek is a small town where old maple trees cast shadows over quiet alleys, where people greet each other by name at the post office, and where the most important things often happen behind closed doors. In one corner of that town stood a modest grocery store called Harvest Hill Market, where Lana Matthews, a single mother in her 30s, worked the register 6 days a week. Lana had warm brown eyes, but her gaze always seemed quiet, like her youthful dreams had been packed away in a box and placed on a high shelf just out of reach. Every morning, Lana would prepare a quick breakfast for her young daughter Ellie, drop her off at school, and rush off to the store. She worked hard, stayed polite, and never complained. But none of that stopped Blake Rudd, her manager, from treating her cruelly day after day. Blake was the kind of man who thrived on using power to push others down, and Lana was the perfect target, a single mother with no one to defend her. "You should be grateful I haven't fired you," he would often hiss like that, right in front of customers, as if to remind Lana she wasn't allowed to have dignity. Her co-workers stayed silent. They saw everything, but no one dared to speak up. Because at Harvest Hill, silence sometimes came with a higher paycheck than kindness. But everything began to change on a Monday morning that seemed just like any other. A man walked into the store. Plaid shirt, faded jeans, a baseball cap. He looked just like any regular customer grabbing coffee and bread. He walked down the aisles, pushing a cart, eyes scanning every detail. No one knew who he was, but the truth was, he was Caleb Mercer, the CEO of the company that owned the entire Harvest Hill chain. And he had decided to go undercover to find out what was really happening inside his own system. And as he reached the checkout, where Lana was trying to ring up a customer, he heard the very first thing, "Hurry up, or are you so old you can't even do this anymore?" Blake's voice snapped from behind her, cold as a razor blade. Lana flinched slightly. Her hands trembled as she held the item, trying to stay composed. She said nothing, not a word in protest. Caleb didn't know her name, but he recognized that look, the look of someone who had been overlooked for so long. She had begun to believe she was truly invisible. He walked out of the store that day, but he didn't walk out of the story, because sometimes all it takes is one person truly seeing to change everything. Caleb Mercer left the Harvest Hill Market that morning empty-handed, but with a heavy heart. He hadn't found any discrepancies in the inventory, no signs of bookkeeping fraud. What he had found was Lana Matthews' eyes, and the chilling indifference of a system that allowed this to happen in silence. The next morning, Caleb returned. No announcement, no assistant, no TV crew filming an undercover episode. Just him and a small notebook tucked in the pocket of his worn-out flannel shirt. He pushed a shopping cart, slowly, like any regular customer. But his eyes weren't on the products. His eyes were scanning the faces of the staff. In a corner of the store, Lana was restocking the bread shelves. She wore a faded beige apron, her hair neatly tied back, her movements efficient. But Caleb noticed the sharp, shallow breaths she took as Blake Rudd began to approach. "Change this price tag, and don't make me remind you a third time," Blake muttered. Not loudly, but with a tone sharp enough that anyone nearby could tell this wasn't a suggestion. Lana nodded. She didn't dare make eye contact. Caleb stood behind the shelf across from them, watching. He jotted a note into his notebook. Overtime. No explanation given. No one smiles. No one talks. Every gaze is lowered. Around noon. Caleb deliberately approached Lana's register. He picked out a few simple items, a carton of milk, some cookies, a bunch of romaine lettuce. As Lana reached to take the items from him, their eyes met for the first time. "You look more tired today than yesterday," he said without thinking. Lana looked up, momentarily startled. "I'm fine. Thank you for coming back," she replied with a small smile, though her eyes remained unchanged. While ringing up the groceries, her hand accidentally dropped the receipt. Caleb bent down to pick it up, and at that moment, a voice sliced through the air. "You look kinda familiar. Don't you have anywhere better to be than this dump?" Blake's voice rang out from behind, dripping with sarcasm. Caleb slowly stood upright and turned around. He didn't say a word. He simply stared at Blake, longer than most would, as if reading every habit etched into the man's face. "I like this place," Caleb replied simply, his voice calm, but his eyes never blinked. Blake scoffed lightly and walked off. Lana lowered her head, packing the items into the bag quickly. Her face flushed, whether from embarrassment, anger, or helplessness. No one could tell. Caleb left the store. But this time, he didn't go far. He parked his car behind the building and pulled out his notebook to jot down more Blake. Interrupts customers, mocks employees in front of outsiders. No one dares to laugh or joke during his shift. He looked up at the metal roof, where the air conditioning unit hummed quietly. For a fleeting moment, Caleb didn't feel like he was running a company, but a machine that wore down human dignity. As the sun began casting long shadows through the window panes, Caleb wrote his final line for the day. If someone like Lana is still holding on in a place like this, then she is worth changing the entire system for. Caleb Mercer wasn't the kind of man to make decisions based on one visit. He had overseen deals worth hundreds of millions. He knew what's visible is often just a tiny slice of the iceberg. And this time, the iceberg was named Harvest Hill Market, Bristol Creek Branch. Over the following week, Caleb became a regular. Each day, he showed up at different times: early morning, midday, late afternoon. He didn't ask questions, he observed. He walked through every aisle, paying attention to how employees spoke, or more accurately, how they didn't speak. He quietly stood near the fresh produce section, where a young worker named Jaden always kept his head down, his eyes avoiding Blake every time the man passed by. He paused at the receiving area, where a frail employee named Ruby was struggling to push a box twice her weight, while Blake sat comfortably in the surveillance room, watching videos on his phone. Once, Caleb happened to overhear Blake calling out to Lana in the middle of an aisle. "You recorded the wrong inventory count. Now skip your lunch break and go double-check it all in the stock room." Lana bit her lip and nodded softly. Not a single word of protest. Caleb knew she was hungry because just minutes earlier he had seen her put a cheap sandwich back in her locker, saying she didn't have time to eat. But what hurt Caleb the most wasn't Blake's words. It was the way Lana didn't flinch. She was used to it. She wasn't hoping for justice. She was just trying to survive each shift. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat alone in a small motel room near the town, his laptop open but untouched. On the screen was a personnel file. Blake Rudd, store manager for 4 years, previously warned for inappropriate language, but retained because of consistent sales performance. And Lana's file. Just one brief system note. Punctual, no violations, no complaints. Caleb closed the laptop. He sighed. Sometimes, the most important people are the quietest, and because they're quiet, they're the ones most often forgotten. The next morning, Caleb returned to the store, and for the first time, he didn't just observe. He went looking for Lana in the produce section, where she was neatly arranging bunches of collard greens. "Good morning. Do you remember me?" Lana turned around, slightly surprised. Yes. You're the one who buys cookies and romaine lettuce," she said with a small smile, her eyes still cautious. "I'm Caleb," he said, extending his hand. "Lana," she shook his hand politely. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 3 years. Seems like people respect you." Lana let out a soft chuckle. "I think they just want peace, same as me." A few minutes later, Caleb stepped out of the store. But this time, the question in his mind was no longer, "What's going wrong?" It was a different question. "How do I fix this?" Caleb returned to Harvest Hill on a drizzly afternoon. The town of Bristol Creek was soaked in mist, and the tin rooftops echoed with the steady patter of rain, as if the sky itself was keeping rhythm for an unnamed, sorrowful song. He stepped into the store, slightly damp. But unlike every other visit, today, he didn't push a shopping cart. He walked straight to the checkout counter where Lana stood, leaning down into the coin drawer. "It's raining. Do you have a coat?" he asked gently, his voice sincere. Lana flinched slightly, then looked up, surprised to see the familiar customer standing there empty-handed. "I'm fine. Rain like this is normal here," she replied with a faint smile. But for the first time, Caleb noticed it was a smile, practiced to perfection. "I just made some coffee. Do you have a minute for a break?" he asked, holding out a steaming cup. Lana hesitated briefly, then nodded. "Just 5 minutes." "Okay. Otherwise Blake will—" She paused, then shook her head. "Never mind." They sat on a wooden bench near the emergency exit at the back of the store, a place rarely visited. The rain fell softly. The smell of damp earth filled the air. "I don't mean to pry," Caleb began, "but I've noticed you aren't being treated fairly here." Lana didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, her index finger slowly circling the rim of the coffee cup. Then she spoke. As if telling someone else's story. I studied education, wanted to be a preschool teacher. Why didn't you continue? I got pregnant at 23. No husband. No one stood by me. Your family. My mother said, "You made your bed. Now lie in it." She cut me off after that. I haven't heard her voice since the day Ellie was born. Caleb gently squeezed the paper cup in his hand, not out of anger, but because he was trying to steady himself against a story he'd heard far too often, and yet one that still hurt every time. I've done all kinds of jobs, waited tables, babysat, retail, but this place pays regularly, so I held on. "And Blake?" Caleb asked softly. Lana pressed her lips together. She didn't need to answer. Her eyes already had. They sat in silence for a while. Caleb glanced out at the parking lot, where Lana's old car was usually parked at the far end of the row. Then he turned back to her, his voice gentler than ever. "You've been through more than most people I've ever met, but it seems no one's ever told you that." Lana let out a small laugh, bitter and quiet. "People only notice when I miscount by a penny." Caleb looked straight at her. "I notice, and I believe you deserve far more than this." Lana didn't reply, but for the first time, in those faded brown eyes, a sliver of light appeared, as if someone had just cracked open a small window inside her. As she stood to return to work, she turned back to Caleb. "Thank you for asking." Her voice wavered slightly, but it was more real than anything he had heard all week. Caleb stayed seated a few minutes longer after she left, his heart heavier, but also clearer. He was no longer a CEO inspecting a store. He was a human being who had just been invited into someone else's loneliness. There are moments that change a life, but sometimes what pushes us to make a decision isn't a single moment. It's the build-up of hundreds of small things ignored for far too long. And that morning, at Harvest Hill, Caleb Mercer reached that threshold. He arrived at the store early. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the supermarket lights were already glowing pale yellow. Lana was rearranging the fruit display, her body leaning forward, as if bracing her entire frame on legs that had grown tired. Caleb stood behind a shelf, saying nothing. He simply observed. And for the first time, he saw Lana gasping quietly, without trying to mask it. Her cheeks were more hollow, the shadows under her eyes more pronounced. And in a fleeting moment, when she turned her back, he noticed the faded uniform shirt had slipped slightly, revealing a bandage hastily applied to her lower back. A wound. Maybe from lifting boxes, maybe from bumping into something. But what hurt him most wasn't the injury. It was that she didn't complain about it, as if it too was part of the job. After the morning shift, Caleb waited for Lana at the back exit where they'd spoken the day before. "Lana," he called softly. She startled when she saw him, then gave a slight nod. Tired, but not distant. "Was your shift longer today?" he asked. "Blake said I had to reorganize the stockroom because the display wasn't up to standard." "And the stockroom, well, You've seen it." She gave a faint chuckle, then shrugged. "It's okay, but you're in pain." Caleb looked into her eyes. Lana opened her mouth to deflect, but then sighed. "I don't have another option. You do. Now you do," he replied, his voice firm in an unfamiliar way. Lana looked up. Caleb had risen to his feet, his gaze distant, fixed on the parking lot. "Lana, I want you to hear this. Your silence is not a sign of weakness. It's proof of your strength, but it doesn't have to last forever. I know," she whispered. "But my strength doesn't pay for my daughter's meals, and my pride doesn't cover rent." Caleb turned to her, and for the first time, the gentle smile he always wore was gone. "I'm not going to let you keep fighting this alone." That evening, Caleb made a video call with Lauren, the regional director overseeing 17 Harvest Hill branches. He opened his laptop, turned on the camera, and looked directly into it. "I have enough evidence, detailed notes, and employee testimonies to recommend the immediate termination of Blake Rudd, and I want to begin the process right now." Lauren was taken aback. "Sir, Blake's performance metrics are very strong. This branch has the lowest shrink rate in the entire system." "Are you sure you're talking about numbers?" "I'm talking about people." Caleb interrupted, his eyes steady on the screen. "I'll be submitting the internal report, footage from store cameras, and testimony from 2 other employees. If the system won't change, then I will change the system." Lauren said nothing for a moment, then nodded. The next morning, Caleb returned to the store with a small folder in hand. He met Lana Matthews privately in the employee break room. "I'd like you to prepare for a serious conversation this afternoon," he said plainly. Lana froze. Am I being let go?" Caleb smiled. "No. I'm here to tell you. An opportunity is waiting for you." That afternoon, the air inside the Harvest Hill branch office seemed to thicken. The door was closed. The lights shone a little brighter than usual, and 3 people sat in the room: Caleb Mercer, Regional Director Lauren Haynes, and Store Manager Blake Rudd. "You know why I'm here, don't you?" "Blake," Caleb began. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to make the entire room pause for a breath. Blake leaned on the desk, forcing a weak smile. "I assume it's a performance review. Our sales figures are better than 4 other branches in the district. Performance is something you can measure, but character is something you feel, and I've felt enough." Caleb opened his folder and slid a stack of printed documents to the center of the table. Inside were detailed reports, instances of employee bullying, written testimonies from Jaden and Ruby, surveillance footage from the stockroom over 3 consecutive days. Lauren glanced down at the summary report. Her face slowly lost color. Blake sat frozen, nothing left to defend himself with except a hollow smirk. "She's just a cashier. You're blowing this out of proportion. Her name is Lana Matthews, and she's the reason I came here. As for you, you are being removed from this position, effective immediately." Caleb enunciated each word with clarity. Blake jumped up, ready to argue, but Lauren gave a firm nod to confirm the decision. The paperwork will be sent to headquarters. You'll receive official notice by tomorrow. Please leave the office. An hour later. As Blake exited the store in silence, Lana still had no idea what had happened. She was wiping down a shelf when a fellow employee asked her to head upstairs. She walked up, the scent of fresh lemon cleaner still clinging to her hands. When she opened the office door and saw Caleb and Lauren waiting, she froze. Is something wrong?" she asked, eyes full of worry. Caleb gestured for her to take a seat. Then, gently, he placed a small folder on the table in front of her. "I'd like to talk to you about a possible promotion." Lana blinked. She laughed, clearly confused. "Me, I'm just a cashier." "No, you're a guidepost," Caleb said, his eyes filled with conviction. "Someone who's held this place together without ever being given the power to do so. Now it's time that you are." Lauren smiled, adding, "We'd like to offer you the position of assistant store manager, if you accept. The training program begins next week." Lana went still. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, not out of fear, but because of something she had never prepared for hope. I don't have a degree, no management experience. No one ever taught me those things," she said, voice trembling. Caleb nodded. "Then we'll teach you. And Ellie, your daughter, will see her mother standing where she belongs." The mention of her daughter's name brought tears to Lana's eyes. She nodded, no longer hesitant. "Yes, I'll try." As Lana walked out of the office, she moved slowly down the familiar hallway, but everything felt different. The shelves were still there. The lights hadn't changed. But for the first time, she didn't feel small walking among them. The story of Lana Matthews, the cashier who became assistant manager, quietly swept across the entire Harvest Hill system like a silent but powerful wave. But for Caleb Mercer, giving Lana a new title wasn't enough, because he understood to change the outcome, you must change the root. To grow a tree, you don't water the leaves. In the very first week after Lana stepped into her new role, Caleb quietly put 3 plans into motion. 1. The Ellie's Path Scholarship Fund. One evening, in a temporary office near the Bristol Creek branch, Caleb signed off on a proposal to launch a small scholarship fund, starting with $10,000 dedicated exclusively to the children of low-income employees in the company. The first recipient, Ellie Matthews, age 6. The fund would cover her elementary through high school tuition, along with counseling support and extracurricular programs. So Ellie wouldn't just go to school, she'd grow up in a world that believed in her. A child should never carry the consequences of a battle their parents were forced to fight. Caleb wrote in the preface of the program plan. 2. Personal financial counseling for Lana. Caleb quietly arranged for Lana to meet with a financial advisor, not to learn how to get rich, but simply to learn how to gain stability. "Have you ever created a personal budget?" the advisor asked. "Just tried to survive each week?" Lana answered, "Honestly." The first sessions were awkward, but after a few weeks, Lana began to understand smart saving, planning for her daughter's future, and for the first time, She began to imagine buying a home. Doesn't have to be big, just a little room where Ellie can read books. She said, eyes shimmering. 3. Reforming the internal culture of Harvest Hill. Caleb didn't go on television. He didn't send out a company-wide email blast. He did one simple thing. He wrote a new internal conduct guide titled Respect First, People Before Performance. In it, he required every branch to hold monthly anonymous listening sessions where employees could write down what they'd never had the chance to say. She require all new managers to complete 2 weeks of role reversal, working as a cashier, stocker, and janitor to learn how to serve from the ground up. Establish a lead shift guide position, chosen from among employees known for their integrity, to act as a bridge between management and staff. When Lauren, the regional director, asked Caleb, "Do you really think these changes are enough to transform the entire system?" Caleb simply smiled. "I don't need to change the whole system in one day. I just need to start with one place. And I found that place. Her name is Lana Matthews." A month later, as Lana walked out of her very first team meeting as assistant manager, she saw Caleb waiting by the door, holding a warm cup of coffee. "This time I made it ahead of time, so you won't have to skip lunch," he said with a gentle smile. Lana took the cup, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to. Just keep doing what you've always done. Only now, with the light finally shining on you." Since the day Lana Matthews became assistant manager, things didn't instantly get easier. In fact, the real challenges were only just beginning. On her first morning in the new role, when Lana walked into the staff meeting room with a stack of plans in her hand, the eyes of those who had once been her co-workers fell quiet. There were no warm greetings, no pats on the back, only stiff nods and glances laced with equal parts skepticism and caution. She only got promoted because the CEO likes her. A cashier running the store now. Let's see how long that lasts. Being a leader takes more than just hard work, you know. Those whispers weren't spoken directly, but Lana heard them, with the full intuition of someone who had spent too long surviving in a world of silence and cold shoulders. And then came the first test. That week, the inventory system malfunctioned. An order error resulted in the stockroom receiving 300 crates of milk instead of 100. Blake, the former manager, would have likely yelled at the stockroom staff, blamed the order department, and told them to figure it out. But Lana, she spent the entire afternoon in the stockroom with Ruby and Jaden, the same colleagues she once worked alongside as a cashier. "I'll do this with you," she said, removing her clean apron and pulling on a cold storage jacket. Ruby looked at her. "You're the boss now, aren't you? And that's exactly why I should be the first one in." The team chuckled softly. No one said more, but their hands started moving faster. And for the first time in weeks, the cold room wasn't so eerily silent. 3 days later, Lana introduced a 10-minute pre-shift meeting instead of sending emails like Blake used to do. She began with one honest sentence. "I know some of you aren't used to seeing me standing here. I wasn't used to it either. But I promise, no one will ever feel alone here the way I once did." A few seconds of silence. Then Jaden, the quiet young man, nodded. "We'll try. Just don't give up on us either." Lana didn't give up. She spent time observing each person, not to control, but to understand. She remembered the names of her employees' kids, checked in when someone looked tired, kept a box of Band-Aids in her drawer, and placed a small sign in the break room. "Have you smiled today?" No one was forced to answer, but little by little, someone wrote on it every day. Jaden told the lamest joke ever. Ruby made salty coffee but drank it anyway because she felt bad wasting it. Lana called her mum for the first time in 5 years, and she picked up. Caleb dropped by unexpectedly at the end of the month. He didn't say anything when he saw Lana helping stock shelves. Sleeves rolled up, dust smudged on her cheek. "Hey, boss," she grinned, giving him a playful wink. Caleb laughed. "I came to check the meeting room, but it seems like the meeting room moved out here." That night, Caleb wrote one single line in his personal journal. "When someone no one believed in begins believing in others, that's when a system truly starts to heal. When someone who's been torn down is given a chance, it can be surprising. But when that same person uses the chance to lift others up, what happens next isn't just surprising, it's transformational." 3 months after Lana Matthews became assistant manager, the Bristol Creek branch of Harvest Hill began to change in ways no memo could announce. No one declared a culture shift. There were no motivational posters, but people started to step in to help when someone got stuck in the cold storage, share food when someone forgot lunch, laugh more. And most importantly, they no longer felt fear at the sound of a manager's footsteps. One of Lana's first initiatives was a program called Shift and Share. Each week, a seasoned employee would mentor a newcomer, not to supervise, but to pass down the real survival skills of working in retail. Ruby, once brought to tears by Blake's shouting, became one of the most beloved mentors in the store. She shared, Lana told me, "You don't have to be great, just be kind. Everything else can be learned." In the staff break room, the old board that read, "Have you smiled today?" had been replaced with a new one. "What do you want to give today?" And the notes began to appear more frequently. "I'm buying Jaden coffee for the first time. I'm calling my mom to say I forgive you. I'm complimenting Lana, even if it makes her blush." Friday evening, Lana picked Ellie up from school. The little girl proudly showed her a drawing, a woman in an apron, standing between grocery shelves, surrounded by smiling employees and customers. In the corner of the picture was a messy line of crayon-written words. "Mom is my quiet hero." Lana froze, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't ask Ellie why she drew her that way, because she knew. Her daughter had finally seen her not just as someone who carried the weight of everything, but as someone to look up to. On an unannounced visit, Caleb once asked Lana, "Do you think you're changing the world?" Lana smiled, shook her head. "I'm not changing the world. I'm just changing how people feel when they walk into their workplace." Caleb nodded, silent for a few seconds, then said, "Then maybe that's exactly how the world gets changed." That evening, He received an email from a senior executive. Bristol Creek branch now has the lowest turnover rate in the region, the highest internal morale score in the entire system, without a single PR campaign. Caleb didn't reply right away. He simply saved the email into a special folder titled "Things Worth Keeping." After months of a honeymoon phase in her role as assistant manager, the real test finally arrived unannounced and unkind. A major customer, local restaurant owner Gordon Price, had pre-ordered 200 crates of organic vegetables from Harvest Hill for the grand opening of his new branch. The order had been confirmed in the system, but there was a small mistake. The delivery date had been entered incorrectly 3 days late. The entry error came from Leo, a 19-year-old new data clerk. But Lana was the final approver, and she hadn't caught the mistake. On the morning of the grand opening, Gordon showed up to collect his order, only to find the stock hadn't even arrived at the warehouse. He erupted, furious, shouting in front of all the staff and several customers, "I trusted this place to be professional. Now I look like a fool in front of my partners. I'm taking all my business to another chain. No one dared to breathe." Leo went pale. Ruby stood behind the shelf, trying to make herself invisible. Lana stepped forward. In that moment, most former managers would have blamed a subordinate, written up a report, or pinned the problem on a technical glitch. But Lana did something different. She walked forward and stood directly in front of Gordon, a man a full head taller, fuming, and in no mood to listen. "Mr. Price, this mistake is ours, and mostly mine for not double-checking before approving the order." Gordon froze, not because he wasn't still angry, but because he had never heard a manager say that. Lana continued, "I can't undo the timing, but I can change the outcome. If you give me 2 hours, I will personally gather the full order from nearby branches and deliver it to your restaurant before doors open." "You really think you can pull it off?" Gordon growled. "I don't make promises, unless I'm ready to give everything I have to keep them," Lana replied, eyes steady. 2 hours later, a small delivery truck driven by Lana herself pulled up in front of Gordon's restaurant. Ruby sat in the passenger seat. Leo was in the back, drenched in sweat, but his face flushed with relief. All 200 crates were lined up neatly at the entrance. Lana even brought a few bunches of fresh basil as a gift. Gordon stepped outside. He looked. Then he said, just one sentence, "I like people who own their mistakes and know how to fix them without throwing others under the bus." He shook Lana's hand firmly and nodded. That evening, after the shift ended, Leo came to find Lana in the break room. He lowered his head and mumbled, "I'm sorry I messed everything up." Lana looked at him and spoke gently. "You made one mistake and learned something for life. But if you'd blamed someone else, you'd have learned the wrong lesson forever." Leo smiled, eyes slightly misty. "I'll remember that." The next day, in her internal report to the executive board, Regional Director Lauren wrote, "If leadership used to be defined by power, then I believe it now needs a new definition. The courage to take blame so others have the freedom to rise." 6 months after Caleb Mercer walked into Harvest Hill as a stranger, he returned again. This time, not in disguise, not undercover. He arrived in full view, CEO of Harvest Hill Holdings, but the surprising thing was, no one looked nervous. Instead of fearful glances like before, he was greeted with genuine smiles, unforced, unafraid. Ruby placed a glass of water on the table. "Good morning, Mr. Caleb. Want me to give you a tour of our new produce display?" Ruby smiled as she set the glass down. Jaden jogged past, nodding toward the back. "Your old boss is in line for one of Lana's famous muffins," Caleb chuckled. He was ushered into the new meeting room, not the cold, tense space it used to be, but now a bright, open area. On the whiteboard, scribbled in colorful marker, was the day's suggestion, today's proposal. "Let employees choose the weekend playlist." Lana walked in, holding a stack of reports. But this time, it was Caleb who stood up first. "I'm here to listen, not just to evaluate," he said. Lana presented her proposal for a redesigned management training system. A program built around 3 core pillars. Listen first, respond second. Experience from the ground up, not the top down. Lead by serving, not by commanding. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded gently. "I used to think a great leader was someone who could change others, but now I believe the greatest leader is the one who inspires others to change themselves." At the end of the meeting, Caleb walked out to the customer lounge area. There, he happened to notice a photo hanging in the break room. It was of Lana sitting beside Ellie, both eating sandwiches, smiling. Above them was a child's handwriting, messy and honest. "Mom says, if no one believes in you, start by believing in yourself." Caleb stared at it for a long while, then placed a hand over his heart, not out of pride, but because he understood what he planted that day wasn't power, it was trust. And now it had taken root. Before leaving, Caleb asked Lana, "Do you feel you've changed enough to call this success?" Lana smiled without hesitation, without shrinking back. "No, but I've changed enough to no longer feel small." Caleb nodded. "Then I think we've started building a model worth replicating." A few weeks later, an internal announcement went out across Harvest Hill. The first Serve to Lead leadership model will be implemented company-wide based on the Bristol Creek branch, led by Lana Matthews. And one late afternoon, as the sun slanted through the glass window, Ellie sat in the corner of the room doing her homework. She looked up and asked Mom, "Do you think I could be a CEO like Mr. Caleb one day?" Lana didn't answer right away. She looked at her daughter, the same daughter whose eyes no longer held fear like they once did. Then she responded, softly, "You can be anything you want, as long as you don't forget how to love." Maybe Lana Matthews never imagined her life would begin rewriting itself the moment she stood behind a cash register. And maybe Caleb Mercer never imagined that the greatest leadership lesson of his life wouldn't come from a strategy room, but from the tired eyes of a woman who had carried the weight of the world and still kept her kindness. Their journey had no spotlight, no parades or fanfare. Just quiet change in how people looked at one another, in how they said good morning, in how they began to ask themselves today, did I help someone feel seen? From one small branch in Bristol Creek, the Serve to Lead model began to spread, not because of top-down mandates, but because employees in other branches wanted it for themselves. People started sharing stories about Miss Lana, the woman who was once scolded in front of customers, now standing up to protect those with no voice, about Mr. Caleb, the only CEO willing to sit and stack produce just to understand what his employees truly needed. And from those stories, a quiet wave began to ripple outward. Leadership isn't a position. It's the ability to truly see people. And kindness is a long-term strategy. Ellie Lana's daughter had now started keeping a journal. In it, she wrote, "My mum doesn't know how to yell, but people still listen to her because she does the right thing even when no one's watching." On his final night before officially stepping down as CEO, Caleb Mercer wrote one last line in the leather-bound notebook that had traveled with him for 30 years. "I used to think success meant opening 100 new branches. Today, I believe success is when I open just one door for someone who's never had a path. And you, the one watching this video right now, have you ever felt overlooked? Have you ever wished someone would just pause, look you in the eye, and say, 'I see you, and you are worthy of trust'? If so, remember this. Sometimes, the greatest change begins when you stop staying silent, when you dare to believe in yourself, even when no one else does. Somewhere out there, there may be another Lana, someone quietly enduring, waiting for someone to truly see her. And if today you have power, a platform, a seat at the table, don't use it to create distance. Use it to lift someone up. Because sometimes one look of belief can save an entire life.